Steven Interviews You. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Steven Interviews You. This is episode number 16, and this is a series where I just sit down and have a good chat with a special guest, and his name would be, introduce yourself.
My name is John Lewis. My YouTube channel is at John Lewis Sports. And Stephen, you know, you had the high point with Tony Riley on your show, and now you've hit a low point. But I'm happy that you asked me to be on your show, and happy to talk to you.
Thanks for being here, John. I really do appreciate it. So, so let's just get started with just sports, since we're here talking about sports. Your backstory. How did you, first of all, become a sports fan in general? How did that all get started for you?
Well, I grew up. I mean, I still live in Kentucky. I've all of a half a century of life here. Only 1 year that I did not live in Kentucky. But, you know, growing up, I lived in Eastern Kentucky. That was big blue country, which was, you know, University of Kentucky, and grew up, watching UK basketball, especially. And then, you know, as I got older, I really got into, in my teenage years, really got into pro football. And that's has been my love ever since. And then in 1993, I went to college at Kentucky Wesleyan to get into broadcasting. I thought I wanted to be the next, you know, Walter Cronkite or Dan Rather. And you know, by luck, I had done an internship at a CBS station in Hazard, Kentucky, in Eastern Kentucky, which is near my hometown. And I got a call in 1993. I'll never forget it. The news director called and he said, you know, I know that you were a news intern. You did some sports, but would you be interested in, and I did a sports internship in college. He goes, would you be interested in a sports position? And I said, sure. And that launched a 30-year career of me being a sports broadcaster and did some news. And then I kind of got out of it, got a real job in PR about 3 years ago. But that's kind of the backstory. And then, but I still want to do video, and I get to do a lot of video in my current job in public relations and marketing, but I want to do something that was pro football oriented. So that's why I kind of got into YouTube, and here I am.
Yeah. So you mentioned that on your channel, you mentioned that you spent 30 years as a TV sports reporter / anchor.
Right.
Can you tell me what that was like? Because that sounds like a long journey in and of itself.
It was a long journey. I started off, you know, in a really small town, which was my own, you know, kind of hometown. So it was cool. But, you know, I got to cover a lot of University of Kentucky sports there. And I did that for about 3 years. And then I did some news, and I went to North Carolina, on the coast of North Carolina, worked at an ABC affiliate there. And I was doing news there, and I decided, you know, sports was a lot more fun, and it's something I enjoyed a lot more. And then the sports director job came open at my old station that I'd been to previously. Got the call, and they were like, if you want the job, it's yours. And I said, okay. And I worked in sports there as sports director for another 3 years, and then came to here in Louisville, Kentucky, worked for the Fox affiliate as a sports reporter and anchor for 20 years. And I loved it because I got to see a lot of things and meet a lot of people on the company dime that, you know, had I been in any other kind of position, I never would have met these people, and certainly had one-on-one time with them. I got to see a lot of things. I got to cover several Final Fours. I covered 20 Kentucky Derbies. I got to go to a lot of really cool venues in both basketball and football. So it was fun, and it was a passion of mine. And, you know, the broadcast industry has changed quite a bit, especially, you know, locally. And about 4 years ago or so, I decided, you know, I need to do something else. And because I just felt like it just feels like in local television these days, and a lot of people out there watching might see it in their own local markets, there's been a little bit of value that has been taken away from local sports coverage. And I was starting to see that in this market here in Louisville, Kentucky. So that's when I decided I was going to do something else. But I wanted to do something that still spoke to the passion that I had. And, you know, when I started to look, Stephen, at public relations jobs, they all wanted video editing experience, but they wanted it on Adobe Premiere, which I had not used. So I said, what's the way that's going to how can I force myself to make myself learn Adobe Premiere. And I'd always kicked around the idea of a YouTube channel. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to launch a YouTube channel that will make me learn Adobe Premiere editing. And I did. And then about 2 months later, I was able to kind of know enough. And then I got a PR job, but I use different, editing software now. But the point being is like that was what kind of spurred me. But it was I regret nothing. It was a 30-year career that was a lot of fun. And like I said, I went to a lot of places, met a lot of people, and didn't spend a lot of my own money doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, every time I hear about stories such as yours, spending a long time in sports media, it's always fascinating to me just to know the backstory behind that.
Yeah.
So, going on to football, which is a sport that you cover a lot. Um, for starters, what are some of your, in general, for like the NFL or college, what are some of your favorite teams that you like to follow?
Well, you can probably imagine I'm a Seahawks fan.
Yep.
And yeah, how did a boy from Eastern Kentucky become a Seahawks fan? It's like this tells you how old I am. When I became a Seahawks fan, they were actually really good in the late '80s there for a while and very fun to watch. And that's kind of how that was the team that I saw a lot of for whatever reason on television. And I thought, hey, they're kind of good, and I kind of stuck with them ever since through thick and thin. So that's always been my the Seahawks have always been one of my favorite teams. But I just really love the NFL, like and pro football in general. But, my channel at John Lewis Sports is really kind of focused on alt pro football, which would be UFL and then a lot of historic stuff. But I love pro football. I don't follow a lot of college football, but I do love college basketball. That seems to be in my blood, being from Eastern Kentucky. So it was like I said, I grew up a University of Kentucky basketball fan. Moved here to Louisville, which was like the huge rival. But I tell a lot of people all the time, I'm so old that when I was growing up, UK and U of L never played each other. So there was never like that hate of U of L or anything. And then, I covered the team for so long, for 20 years, that you just get to know those players and you get to know those coaches. And, you root for people after a while. You kind of lose your fandom when you're around it, and for UK as well. So, but I love college basketball, just, top to bottom, on all levels. So yeah, those are so I don't really have a specific like favorite college sports team, but yeah, as far as the NFL goes, I kind of love all the teams except for the Steelers, but I do love the Seahawks. That's always been the one.
Yeah. So sticking to football,
Yeah.
at some point, you went to alternate football leagues such as spring leagues,
Right.
and that is at the heart of your channel, John Lewis Sports. Could you tell me how that got started? How you just really got started covering this spring football leagues in general?
Well, my first real kind of falling in love with spring football was with the World League of American Football in the early '90s, like 1991, which was only lasted a couple of years here, like in its first incarnation. And my college roommates were just all over me all the time. Like, what are you watching? What is this? As a buddy of mine still calls it, why are you watching this third world football? But I just loved it because even then I could really see there were so many stories of these players. Some of those players who had been, in the NFL trying to get back, or who were on loan from the NFL. And it was just very different. It seemed like it was almost a little more accessible. Plus, it was football in the spring, so it was kind of great. So I kind of fell in love with it. And then later on, when the XFL came around in 2001, I was just so excited. There had been a lot of flirtations with some very forgotten leagues from, throughout the '90s. And then it kind of picked back up. But that's always kind of been my love. And the reason that I focused on that for my YouTube channel is because, number one, again, it's pretty accessible. I've gotten to know a lot of people within the United Football League, not just the people who cover it, but also the people who in the league. And, most of them are pretty open about helping, content creators like me who kind of do it as a hobby, to kind of get the word out. Because, it's spring football, as you know, Stephen, it's grassroots. It is a grassroots movement. It's not the NFL. It's not global. It's not, you could put on a game on a Tuesday night and get, 30 million people watching, the NFL. You can't do that with spring football because it's a little bit more grassroots. but that's what I want to do, is tell a lot of the stories. And then, as I said, as I kind of follow college or spring football and alt football, I started diving into the history of it, because you would always hear like, well, this town, they once had a team in the Continental Football Conference, Continental Football League, or they had this and that. And that always piqued my interest, because all these other communities that we didn't really know about, with their football history, you dive into it. And a lot of these smaller towns, in fact, I just did a video about Columbus and Louisville. Like, it goes back 100 years to the other football teams that they had, pro football around. So it's just been an interest and a hobby of mine. And I just, kind of love it. It's really turned into even a passion, just to be able to connect the two. I get to follow spring football, kind of be a part of it as far as covering things. I've, gone to Birmingham, I've gone to Memphis, I've gone to St. Louis several times. It's really fun. And then to be able to do that and then connect that with my passion, for video and storytelling. And it's, I've done it for about 3 or 4 years now and just really love it.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier about the World League of American Football,
Right.
which was later known as NFL Europe.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts in general? What are your thoughts on alternate football leagues, spring football leagues, starting in other countries other than the United States? Because
Yeah,
I've seen, yeah,
I'm sorry. Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. Oh, sorry. Because because I've seen a lot of attempts to grow the game of American football overseas. And I've had a conversation in the past with Greg St. James. He's
Yeah.
based in Japan. He was telling me about what was going on there in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts internationally about American football leagues?
I had a friend of mine who I'd grown up with, who played he played in Germany in the 90s. And he said, like, even then, he said this was in a much smaller football league. And he said, because there's a passion there for American football that it just seems to be like nobody's really seeing on a community level. Certainly, the NFL has had a global reach for decades. And, we saw the European League of Football, which I really wish had been a little more accessible here in the United States, because the level of play for a lot of these teams was really good, but it was just hard to find. And I don't think a lot of people were going to pay, whatever it was, $12 or $13 a month to watch it, or whatever it was. So I think that there is an international appeal with American football. And I think it's strong. And I think the NFL has exploited that. And that was one of the reasons, as you know, that NFL Europe ended up folding shop, because the NFL really figured out that we don't have to put leagues here. We can just keep bringing games over here, rather than try to field an entire league. And we're going to get sellout stadiums. We've seen it all year this year. We're going to continue to see it this weekend and beyond. So it's just, I think sometimes maybe that might undermine some of these communities who are trying to start these leagues. And I know that there's another European league that is kind of the fallout of whatever's happened with ELF. So, I hope it catches on. I think, to me, personally, I think it's a great game, and I think there's a reason that it has global appeal. As you know, Stephen, football is a simple game. People try to make it complicated, but it's a simple game. And I think it speaks to people all over the world. And I would love to see some of these leagues catch on, because more football is good football. It's good for everybody. And it's an opportunity. And that's why, like I said, a guy I grew up with and went to high school with got to play in Germany, and you get to see a lot of things. And we've seen a lot of the UFL and, former XFL, USFL standouts play in some of these other leagues. So I think there's a lot of opportunity out there.
Yeah. It's just fascinating to me when I hear of new leagues starting up, whether internationally or here in the United
Yeah.
States. And that's where I'm going to go to next. When it comes to alternate football leagues, over the years, I seem to follow the arena leagues a lot, like arena football. But I've noticed that it's had a lot of trouble over the years getting traction. What are your thoughts on arena football leagues, and why do you think those leagues keep struggling to get attention?
Well, I remember there was a guy who was a general manager at the time of the WUSA, which became the NWSL kind of, later on, women's soccer. And he said, I would bet on a lot of things. He said, but the biggest fool's bet that there is arena football. He said, because there are so many people out there that think that they can make money at it. And they invest all this money. And if you don't have the right league and you don't have the right people who know football and you don't have the right kind of financial backers, it's never going to work. And Stephen, you follow these indoor leagues and you see it. It's fly by night. You see a champion from one league, they win a championship, and then they go join another league. And we've seen what's happened with AF1. It felt like it was about a 99% Kansas league. And then, now you have these teams dropping off and these other teams coming in. They just added a team from Kentucky, I think, like Northern Kentucky. I think it's a management thing. I think there are some people out there who really do try. I think you would probably know this more than I do. I think the IFL might be the one that seems to be the most stable, but they've seen their share of changes too. And it just feels like there are too many leagues, and and there's just not enough support for it. And I think a lot of that goes to financial backing and and management. I'd love to see it come back, like it did late 90s and early 2000s, which was, we were watching arena football on NBC. They had a piece of it. These NFL teams had a piece of them. And I don't know what happened. It just kind of, it's kind of like NASCAR at that time. It kind of like right up here, and then it fell off a lot. And there just wasn't enough finances there. But that's always been the thing that I've seen. It's just poor management. We had an arena team here in Louisville. We had an AF2 team, which, it did really well, but AF2 folded along with, arena football. And then there were some other people that had tried to do an indoor league, and it was just kind of a clown show, and it was just poorly managed. And, you'd try to go to a game and there wouldn't even be a game. It would just be, the doors were locked. We've seen too many of that. And I think there are too many leagues with bad management. And it's just, everybody gets overwhelmed with it, and it folds. It's too bad.
Yeah. I mentioned the arena leagues because there was a time back in the 2000s, especially, where I was following certain arena league teams, including the Columbus Destroyers once upon a time.
Right.
They did have some good teams here and there at times. And it's just sad that leagues like that, the arena league, just cannot maintain its stability. So it's just sad.
It is. It's so fun. To go to those games is a lot of fun. It doesn't really matter like what level it is. It's just really fun. And when you see like good football and it's 50-40 or something, that is always fun. But you're right. It's just too bad they could not figure out a way to sustain it. And it's just too many of these leagues. And that's another thing too. Stephen, if you're in a community where it's like, okay, we've got this team and we're in this league, and then next, okay, now we're in this other league. Now, who are these other teams? That's just, to me, it's like too much change. You're never, and that, which a lot of people are worried about with the UFL right now. It's like, is there too much change where people aren't going to know what's going on, or they're going to lose interest?
Yeah. And speaking of teams popping up in certain markets, as you've alluded to, the Columbus Aviators, they're now going to be setting up shop in the UFL. And for one, I am intrigued by that because it's in my area, just north of me, Columbus. So it's going to be interesting to see how they set up things. So that's going to be my next question. Today, of course, on John Lewis Sports, your channel, you covered the UFL. What are your thoughts right now about the UFL? Historically, how do you think it's been with the UFL, past and present? And what do you like about its structure, and what do you think could improve about the UFL structure?
I'm more optimistic right now than I probably have been in a while. Listen, I was super excited when the USFL came back. I wasn't super into the original USFL. I was kind of a late adopter, after that. But, I went to Birmingham, and it was so much fun that first year because, first of all, you had a Saturday and Sunday where you could watch 8 games for about $20. But I'm more optimistic now than I probably was even after the merger. It was a little bit frightening to me when the XFL played one season and then merged with the USFL, and because we knew there was going to be contraction. They weren't going to take all those teams or have multiple teams in the same city. But with Mike Rapoli coming in, who is a guy that I'm not going to say that I know him, but when I covered the Kentucky Derby, he had a lot of entries in the Kentucky Derby, and so you could just talk to him and know that this guy's a billionaire, but he's got a common touch. And what we have seen in the Orlando news conference, what we saw in the Louisville news conference, and what we saw in the Columbus news conference, he's a guy that has the common touch. And they weren't even, I wouldn't even call them news conferences. It was like the Mike Rapoli show. But what I did like, he had a vision. And I think that's a vision that is shared by the front office. And there's a reason, Stephen, that he joined the league in July officially. And now here we are in October, and he's calling the shots on a lot of things. And he's the face of this league. We haven't seen Daryl Johnston. The Rock is MIA. It's been him and Russ Brandon, the CEO of the UFL. So that's the one thing I'll say that I do like. I like the structure of what they're doing. They didn't try to blow it up and expand too fast. I really thought there should have been 10 teams, maybe even last year, but they were still trying to work some things out. So but what I didn't like was they had a year to kind of figure things out. That merger came together very quickly. And then it felt like this past year, there were some improvements. I'm grading on a curve. I still thought that was a B or a C overall. I thought the gameplay was very good, except for a couple of teams. So I did like that. It's not been watered down talent. So I like that with 8 teams. You had 10 to 12 good quarterbacks that could play. Again, what I didn't like was there have been, and this has happened before, where there was like, well, the Memphis Showboats signed this player, or the San Antonio Brahmas signed this player, and we knew that these teams weren't coming back. So it seemed a little disingenuous, and I think the XFL did the same and then announced the merger. What I like, again, is Mike Rapoli's vision. I think what he had a vision is put these teams in smaller stadiums. They're in Columbus. They're going to play in historic Crew Stadium, which is perfect. Lynn Family Stadium here in Louisville, it's going to be the smallest venue. But anyone who's ever gone out there for a Lou City soccer game or a Racing Louisville game, when they've got 8, 9, 10,000 people, it's a party. They know how to put on a party there. So it's going to be an event. What they're doing with Orlando and all these other places, except not changing the venues in St. Louis and Birmingham. I do like that. Birmingham needs to show up. St. Louis always shows up. So I think it's on the right track. And like I said, I'm more optimistic now than I probably was before the kickoff of the 2022 USFL season.
So with a follow-up question to that, when do you think, just your opinion, of course, but when do you think the UFL is going to be in that position where they can expand the league again by a couple teams or so?
Yeah, well, Rapoli says he wants to do it in I think he said 2028. So, I think that's fair. I think the business kind of outlook of this thing was they wanted to get to profitability in 5 years. So we're heading into year 3. So, or is that, yeah. So it kind of makes sense. Like you could do that. And, if he stays with it, listen, he's a billionaire. He's putting money into this thing. They got the, Qatar Sovereign Fund. This is not there, and they've got Fox and ABC. This is not a league, which we've seen too many times, that's underfunded and overpromised. So the funding is there. I think that's the main thing. Feels like the management is there, and adding Rapoli has been great. So I do think that they might be able to reach profitability by 2028 and expand this league by, even a couple of teams. Again, like I said, I was hoping after year 1 they might add a couple, but it really sounds like, as we have seen, where they had to move Memphis. I went to Memphis last year, and I mean, it was like the turnout, perfect weather, turnout was terrible. So they had to work those things out, and putting these teams into smaller venues, making them events. To me, that you're getting on the right track. You've got the TV deals in place because TV owns this thing. So now you've got to have something for the fans. And I think that's what they're going to do, because when you go to an empty stadium and there's not a lot happening there, nobody's coming back to that, especially for the prices. Ticket prices keep going up. You got to have something for them other than $15 beers and, 2 hours, 3 hours of football.
Yeah. So historically speaking, looking throughout the history of alternate football leagues, spring football leagues, this is like more of a fun question. Which alternate football league, when you look through the history of it, which league, in your opinion, that did not last long, lasted like just one season or so, which league do you think should have or had the potential to last longer than it did?
That's an easy question. 2001 XFL.
Yeah.
Should absolute to me 100% should have lasted more than one season. I got to interview guy who wrote the. If you really like want to get into the weeds of alternate football and the XFL especially, there's a book called The Long Bomb, and this guy who actually works for the Wall Street Journal now and agreed to come on my show and that talked about that book from back then. He was embedded with the XFL. And it was like the stories behind the scenes were incredible, but it was just, again, like we were talking about, a little bit mismanaged. They really tried to do a traditional football league. The problem, as we all know, with the XFL was for football fans, it was too much wrestling. For wrestling fans, it was too much football. If they really would have launched a real football league, sure, you can give some of those wrestling, WW, I guess F at the time, overtones would have been fun, but there was just some really cringe stuff that was going on with that league. And then, they had coming right out of the gate, like they overperformed in what they had promised advertisers because there was so much of a curiosity factor. The problem was there was too much of the wrestling stuff. It turned people off, and too much of the football stuff for the wrestlers turned people off. Then they started to lose advertisers. If there had been a little bit of a better vision, honestly think we might still be talking about the original XFL. That to me was just an easy one. It had NBC's backing. It had, everything was in place for that to be a good traditional football league, but it just fell apart.
Yeah, I do remember back in the day in 2001 watching the original XFL. And while there was some potential there, I could see that there were some red flags right out the gate. So it's not surprising why it did not last that long.
No. Yeah, you didn't have to have a crystal ball to know that it was not going to last after about probably week 5 or 6. But,
yeah.
I was young and optimistic at the time.
Yeah. So in general, when it comes to markets, just specifically markets for a spring football league, alternate football league, in your opinion, what makes a good market, quote unquote, a good market for such a league?
Well, I think you have to have the interest there, and you have to have maybe a little football background. That's why I'm thinking when or if the UFL expands, first of all, they need a Western footprint. And if you go into a place like Oakland, which was abandoned by the NFL, you might have an opportunity to have something that's similar to St. Louis with the UFL, because that community is so football crazy, and it just feels like a lot. You've had Major League Baseball, you've had the NFL abandon Oakland. For a team to come in there to be called their own, I think those kind of communities would work. And I also think that there are underserved communities. Columbus was always one that was on my list. Like I always said, Columbus. I think a year or two ago, I did a video about here's some communities where I think the spring football would work. Biased, I said Louisville, but I said Columbus because Columbus has such a great football history. It is a football cradle, and and then that one of the first pro teams ever with the Panhandles. So it's just like it just seemed to me like those are the kinds of communities where you have a good football base. You're not going to have the same crowds as you get at Ohio State, but man, and I think the theory works here is like with the UFL and these spring leagues, if we can just get a fraction of the NFL audience, yeah, that's fine. But you think if you could get a fraction of the Ohio State audience or these people who are college football crazy, they don't just like college football. I think they like football. So I think in communities like that and in communities where it's been underserved or abandoned by other pro football teams, to me, those are the kinds of places that I think you can have success. Now you have to have you have to dive into the business of it. There's been a longstanding, attempt to get an NBA team here in Louisville. And when you start to look at the finances of it, Louisville compares very much to Oklahoma City in income, in headquarters of businesses. So I think that would go the same for, and I think that's one of the reasons that the UFL came here to Louisville. Now, Mike Rapoli, being a big fan of the Kentucky Derby and being a racehorse owner and having a house in Kentucky, that didn't hurt. But I think there's a lot of that where you start to look at the demographics and the financial things with income and corporate headquarters. There's a market for spring football. And I really, really hope, now I'm a little worried about Orlando, but I really, really hope that Louisville and Columbus prove that to the league this coming year.
Yeah, it is important to find new markets, not just existing markets that already have NFL teams, because I felt like that's been like one oversight of these leagues is that they keep going to these markets that's already there by the NFL. It's like you have to find your own footprint. That's just where I'm at when it comes to that.
100% agree. And that's why, and not that there's a pro football team in Orlando, but I just don't know why they decided to go back to Orlando. Now, luckily they didn't go to Camping World Stadium, which it didn't work out, but they're going to a smaller venue. I mean, I hope it works, man. I'm pulling for them, but you're right. It's like, you can't keep going in. It was like Memphis. You went into Memphis, a place that has been burnt 15 different times since the 60s or 70s, and then you burn them again. They're not, there's talk about, well, maybe we'll go back to San Antonio or Michigan. If I'm in San Antonio or Michigan and I had invested in the Brahmas and the Panthers, I'm not sure that I go back if the UFL comes back. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like one of the only real markets that I feel bad for is San Antonio. I was not expecting them to drop out of the league. So hopefully eventually down the road, UFL can consider going back there. But yeah, other markets like Boise, Idaho, for example, or Salt Lake City, Utah, those kinds of markets, maybe.
So I think Salt Lake would be great. It was tough, like with the AAF. There were a lot of snow games there. So you got a pretty hardy base, and I think you've got some football fans there. That's another place that I think has been kind of underserved with football.
Yeah. So about your channel, John Lewis Sports, it has taken off. So what are some of the plans that you may be having for the future of your channel? What are some things that you got planned?
I'd love to answer that. I don't know. It's kind of the, I keep a running list of like, here's a story I'd like to do, or here's a subject I need to cover. And, I've kind of been all in on the UFL here recently. Kind of my workflow is for instance, like I did a kind of a background with the Continental Football League. So that's one of those leagues that I'd known about, but didn't really know about, like really in depth. So for maybe a month or two, like here and there when I'd have some free time or whatever, I just kind of like start to look into it and take some notes and write some things out. And then it all comes together. So some of these videos sometimes can take 6 months or more. I probably need to be a little bit more consistent, as you said. Luckily the channel has grown, and those videos do very well. The historic videos do really well. It takes a lot of time when you're working a full-time job. So, but I do want to dive into some more of those, historic leagues. And what I really want to do is hopefully as the UFL season progresses and, the UFL would be open to, letting us do a little bit. And I've been able to do a few like one-on-one interviews with some of these players because they have such good stories. That's kind of my passion, is to do storytelling, whether it's the story of a league or the story of a player. So kind of want to keep on that theme as we go along. Certainly there's been some news things that I like to do. But it's the storytelling aspect that to me is the most fun. And that's kind of what I want the theme of that channel to be.
Yeah. So in closing, I have one last question to ask to wrap this up. When it comes to starting your own YouTube channel, for those watching this right now that may be considering doing that, whether it's about sports or anything else, what, in your opinion, John Lewis, what advice would you give to new YouTube channels?
First of all, if you're thinking about it, do it. And what I mean by that is I got into this I'd always kicked around like wanting to do a YouTube channel, but I was always also waiting like, well, I need to get a good microphone. Well, I need to get a good camera. And you start to get into that. I've heard people call it gear acquisition syndrome. You end up getting like tons of all this gear. This is all this gear I'm going to, and I didn't make one video, but I had like a TV studio sitting here in my basement. Here's your camera and here's your microphone. You can do it all right here. Just you start off, because listen, if you have your first videos they're not going to be any good. They're not going to be any good. So just go ahead and do it. And what I learned, and listen, I worked in broadcast television for 30 years. My first videos weren't very, very good because it's kind of a different thing. But the more I did it, the more reps I got, the better I got at the writing, the editing, the posting, all of that stuff. So that's what, to me, it's like, if you keep waiting, there's never going to be this is the perfect time to start. There's never going to be that perfect time. Just go ahead and start it. Get your YouTube channel together, get your channel set up. Don't worry about your profile picture. Don't worry about like this and that. Just go ahead and set it up and start doing it. And then as you get reps and get better, then you start, oh, well, I'm going to work on, this will be my color scheme, or this will be that, this will be that. So that would be my first piece of advice. And the second thing I would say is watch a lot of, make sure they're good ones. But I learned a lot right here on YouTube of watching other people who do YouTube videos and do them the right way and teach it the right way. So to me, like those were the important things of listen to the good advice. Don't listen to you're only one video away from blowing up and being Mr. Beast and all that stuff. That might be true 10 years from now. Start right, but to get to 10 years, you got to start right now. So that's what I always say. There's one channel called Think Media, and the first thing they say in their open is just press record. And I think that really is good advice. Just press record.
Yeah, and that's great advice. I've heard that from other people I've had conversations with. It's just start doing your own thing.
Yeah.
Don't worry about what other people are going to say. Just start doing it. So
well, that's really good advice too, Stephen, because there's too many people out there like, well, what are my friends going to think? What's my parents going to think? What's, my wife, my girlfriend, my boyfriend, husband, what are they going to think? Do it for you. That's what you're doing it for. And you're doing it for the audience you're trying to connect to. It's important what they think.
right. So yeah, solid advice, John. And thank you so much for being my special guest on this show. And guys, for those of you listening to this, I will provide the link to John Lewis Sports, the YouTube channel, down below in the description box for you guys to check out. It's everything that you guys want to know about spring football leagues, alternate football leagues, the history of them. He's got good stuff. I really encourage you guys to check out his channel. So with that, this has been episode number 16 of Stephen Interviews You, and we will be back with more content soon enough on this show. Thank you guys so much, and take care.